Welcome back. Today we're diving into one of the lesser-known entries of the Castlevania series, Castlevania Bloodlines. Released in 1994 for the Sega Genesis, this game marked the series' first and only appearance on a non-Nintendo console during the 16-bit era. This bold move not only highlighted the Genesis capabilities, but also introduced a new chapter in the ongoing battle against Dracula, with a fresh twist in both gameplay and narrative. Bloodlines stood out for its graphical prowess. The Sega Genesis was known for its raw, gritty visuals, and Konami took full advantage of the hardware. The game featured detailed sprites, rich backgrounds, and creative stage designs that showcased a more mature and darker aesthetic compared to its predecessors. The use of parallax scrolling, combined with some of the most impressive boss designs in the series, elevated the game's presentation to a new level. Players found themselves traversing through hauntingly beautiful locales, from the sunken ruins of Atlantis to the eerie mechanical towers of Germany. This European tour was not just a feast for the eyes, but also a thrilling adventure through some of the most atmospheric stages in Castlevania history. Castlevania Bloodlines was a game that dared to be different. It took risks with its setting, characters, and platform, and those risks paid off in spades. It may not always be the first game that comes to mind when thinking about the Castlevania series, but it's a gem that shines brightly in the annals of retro gaming history, especially for those who experienced its thrills firsthand on the Genesis. The story of Castlevania Bloodlines unfolds within a rich tapestry of history, mythology, and the long-standing battle between good and evil that the Castlevania series is famous for. Set in 1917, the game breaks away from the traditional Belmont lineage and the familiar setting of Dracula's castle in Transylvania, instead offering a broader scope by spanning multiple European locations. The narrative is a compelling blend of historical fiction and supernatural horror, weaving real-world events into the fabric of Castlevania's dark lore. At the heart of Bloodlines is the sinister Elizabeth Bartley, the niece of Count Dracula. Her character draws inspiration from the real-life figure of Elizabeth Bathory, a notorious countess from Hungary who was allegedly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of young women, and is often portrayed in folklore as a vampire-like figure. In the game, Elizabeth Bartley rises from her grave with the intent to resurrect her uncle, Dracula, by orchestrating the bloodshed of World War I, a diabolical plot that feeds on the chaos and despair wrought by the global conflict. The game's protagonists, John Morris and Eric Lecard, are drawn into this web of evil as they set out to stop Bartley and prevent Dracula's return. John Morris is the son of Quincy Morris, a character directly linked to Bram Stoker's Dracula, thereby continuing the connection between the Castlevania universe and the literary source that inspired it. As players journey through the game, they're taken on a harrowing tour across war-torn Europe. The story is divided into 6 stages, each set in a different country, with the narrative unfolding through the locations and encounters. The first stage begins in the ruins of a castle in Romania, a nod to the series' roots. From there, the heroes travel to Greece, where they navigate the labyrinthine ruins of Atlantis, filled with mythological monsters. This is followed by a descent into Italy, where they confront the horrors hidden within the Leaning Tower of Pisa. In Germany, the story intensifies as they battle through a nightmarish mechanical fortress, foreshadowing the impending industrialization of war. France and England provide the final backdrops, with battles in the Palace of Versailles and the Thames, leading up to the climactic confrontation. The story of Castlevania Bloodlines is a gripping tale that blends historical elements with the series' established mythology. It expands the Castlevania universe beyond its traditional boundaries, introducing new characters and settings while maintaining the dark gothic tone that fans of the series have come to love. The narrative, though simple on the surface, is enriched by its historical references and the personal motivations of its characters, making it a memorable chapter in the ongoing saga of the battle against Dracula. When it comes to gameplay, Castlevania Bloodlines delivers a classic yet distinctly challenging experience that sets it apart from other entries in the series. Konami leveraged the power of the Sega Genesis to create a game that was not only visually impressive, but also tight in its control mechanics and innovative in its level design. The gameplay is a mix of the traditional platforming and action elements that fans of the series expect, but with enough unique twists to make Bloodlines stand out in the crowded landscape of 16-bit titles. The most notable feature of Bloodlines is its dual character system. Players can choose between 2 protagonists, each with their own unique abilities and playstyles. John Morris, the whip-wielding descendant of the Belmont family, carries the legacy of the series' iconic vampire killer Whip. His gameplay is familiar to fans, focusing on close-range combat with the whip, which can also be used to swing across gaps in levels, adding a layer of traversal mechanics to his repertoire. His whip can be upgraded throughout the game, increasing its reach and power, which is essential for taking on tougher enemies and bosses. On the other hand, Eric Lecard brings something entirely new to the table with his Alucard spear. Unlike John's whip, Eric's spear allows for a more varied attack range, including the ability to strike in multiple directions, including upwards and diagonally. This makes Eric an ideal choice for players who prefer a more versatile combat style. His spear can also be used to pole vault to higher platforms, accessing areas that John cannot reach, which adds a strategic element to character selection. This ability to choose between characters with different abilities and paths through levels gives Bloodlines a layer of replayability, as players may want to experience the game with both characters to fully appreciate the differences in their gameplay. Bloodlines maintains the series' trademark difficulty, challenging players with relentless enemy placement, tricky platforming sections, and tough boss fights. Each of the game's 6 stages is meticulously designed, offering a blend of action, platforming, and puzzle elements. The stages are not only diverse in their visual themes, but also in the challenges they present. For instance, the second stage, set in the ruins of Atlantis, features rising water levels that force players to think quickly and move faster to avoid drowning, while the Leaning Tower of Pisa stage introduces tilting platforms and vertical climbing sections that test the player's precision and timing. The game also incorporates elements that push the Genesis hardware to its limits, with impressive effects like rotating backgrounds, large-scale bosses, and parallax scrolling that enhance the gameplay experience. These visual effects are not just for show, they often serve to heighten the intensity of the gameplay, as players must navigate through environments that shift and change dynamically, adding an extra layer of challenge. The gameplay of Castlevania Bloodlines is a masterclass in 16-bit action platforming. It retains the core elements that made the series a fan favorite while introducing enough new features to keep the experience fresh and engaging. The dual character system, innovative level design, and challenging enemies make it a standout entry in the franchise and a must-play for fans of the genre. The graphics and music of Castlevania Bloodlines are standout elements that helped solidify the game's status as a classic in the 16-bit era. Konami's decision to develop the game exclusively for the Sega Genesis allowed the developers to push the hardware to its limits, resulting in a visually striking and sonically captivating experience that was distinct from its Super Nintendo counterparts. Bloodlines takes full advantage of the Sega Genesis capabilities, presenting a dark and gritty aesthetic that perfectly complements the game's gothic horror theme. The character sprites are well detailed, with fluid animations that bring John Morris and Eric Lecard to life as they battle through hordes of enemies. The game's environments are equally impressive, with each stage offering a unique and atmospheric backdrop that enhances the overall immersion. One of the most impressive aspects of the game's graphics is the use of special effects that were rarely seen on the Genesis. The game features impressive parallax scrolling, which creates a sense of depth in the backgrounds, making the environments feel more dynamic and alive. Additionally, the developers implemented rotation and scaling effects that were challenging to achieve on the Genesis hardware. For example, the spinning tower sections and rotating gears in the Germany stage showcase the Genesis' ability to handle complex visual effects, which were more commonly associated with the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 capability. These effects not only look impressive, but also contribute to the gameplay by adding an extra layer of challenge and variety to the levels. Castlevania Bloodlines features one of the most memorable soundtracks in the series, thanks to the brilliant work of composer Michiru Yamane. This was Yamane's first contribution to the Castlevania series, and she would go on to compose some of the most iconic music in later entries, but her work on Bloodlines set the stage for what was to come. The soundtrack is a masterful blend of haunting melodies, driving rhythms, and gothic undertones that perfectly complement the game's dark and eerie atmosphere. The Sega Genesis sound chip, often criticized for its limitations, was used to great effect in Bloodlines. Yamane managed to coax rich, layered sounds from the hardware, creating music that is both atmospheric and memorable. Each stage is accompanied by a unique track that captures the essence of the environment, Whether it's the melancholic tones of reincarnated soul in the Romanian ruins or the energetic, almost militaristic rhythm of Iron Blue Intention during the battle in Germany, the music not only sets the mood for each stage, but also drives the player forward, adding to the tension and excitement of the gameplay. The graphics and music of Castlevania Bloodlines are key components that elevate the game beyond its gameplay mechanics. The visual design showcases the Sega Genesis at its best, with detailed sprites, innovative effects, and atmospheric environments that bring the dark world of Castlevania to life. Meanwhile, Michiru Yamane's haunting soundtrack not only complements the visuals, but also stands on its own as one of the most memorable scores in the series. Together, these elements create a cohesive and immersive experience that remains etched in the memories of those who played it, making Bloodlines a true gem of the 16-bit era. The legacy of Castlevania Bloodlines is a fascinating one, marked by both its unique place within the Castlevania series and its influence on the evolution of the franchise. Released in 1994, Bloodlines arrived at a time when the Sega Genesis was at the height of its popularity, providing a refreshing alternative to the Castlevania titles that had traditionally been associated with Nintendo consoles. While it may not have achieved the same level of fame as some of its siblings, Bloodlines has earned a dedicated following over the years and is often celebrated for its bold choices in gameplay, setting, and design. At the time of its release, Bloodlines was well received by critics and players alike. The game was praised for its tight controls, challenging gameplay, and impressive graphics elements that were essential to the Castlevania experience. However, because it was exclusive to the Sega Genesis, it didn't reach as broad an audience as the Super Nintendo entries, such as Super Castlevania 4. This limited exposure meant that while it was appreciated by those who played it, Bloodlines didn't initially achieve the same iconic status as some of the other games in the series. In terms of its influence, Bloodlines left a lasting mark on the series. The introduction of multiple playable characters with distinct abilities was a concept that would be revisited in future games, most notably in titles like Castlevania Portrait of Ruin and Castlevania Harmony of Despair. The game's use of diverse and visually creative environments also set a precedent for later entries to experiment more boldly with their level designs and settings. Over the years, Castlevania Bloodlines has gained a stronger reputation, particularly among retro gamers and collectors. The game's rarity has made it a sought-after title, and its inclusion in collections such as the Castlevania Anniversary Collection has introduced it to a new generation of players. This resurgence in popularity has led to a reappraisal of the game's place in the Castlevania canon, with many now viewing it as a pivotal entry that helped shape the direction of the franchise in the years that followed. Castlevania. Bloodlines is a game whose legacy has grown with time. What was once an underrated gem is now celebrated as a bold and important chapter in the Castlevania saga, influencing the series in both subtle and significant ways. Its contributions to the franchise, whether in gameplay, story, or music, continue to resonate, ensuring that Bloodlines remains an essential part of Castlevania's rich history. Thank you for joining us. If you liked this deep dive into the retro world of Castlevania Blood Inez, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, keep questing and keep gaming.